On the line with us, our Congressman Robert Pittenger. And Congressman, I guess you're on break for this part of the week anyway.
Well, wouldn't call it so much of a break. We've been out in the various counties throughout the district, and a couple times going through the district this week, and had a lot of good meetings.
What are you hearing from your constituents during your visits?
Well, we've talked a whole lot about jobs. I've spoken at several groups, economic development groups, and what we're doing right now to try to expand the economy. The Choice Act will remove some of the really tough regulations on financial institutions so that they can be more accessible to provide capital and credit to small business. 70% of our new jobs come from small business, and they've been restricted by these heavy regulations that have been imposed upon, particularly the small banks, the same compliance requirements that are required of the major international banks. So that's important. We're focused really a lot on jobs and cutting the regulations.
How will this stand the president has just taken on the environmental situation affect those?
Well, very much so. He has done the right thing, particularly as it relates to making sure that we don't have burdensome regulations restricting, over-restricting companies. We lose by default to China and India because we have self-imposed regulations, and what he's done is regarding the climate change, we were being forced into requirements that would not be placed on these other countries. And it would be a massive loss of jobs in our country, closing down of many factories and businesses because of having to comply with these extremely difficult regulations.
Is this solely the president's call, or does Congress have to take any action concerning this?
Well, on the climate change, no. This was something that President Obama initiated himself, and he negotiated it out. He didn't take it through Congress. It should be a treaty passed by the Senate. He bypassed the Senate and did it essentially as an executive order. So it wasn't a congressional requirement to begin with.
With the reaction of the major cities and even some of the states to stay in this agreement, does that give you and others in Congress second thoughts?
No, I think what we want to see, the climate change is there. There's a lot of debate out there whether it's man-made or natural causes. I've heard, frankly, experts who are climatologists from MIT, Harvard, UVA, Duke, and other major institutions saying that there's not adequate evidence to support the fact that it's man-made contributed. And, we've had a change in climate over millions of years. And so this is something that has occurred. Frankly, we had climate change in the early 1900s, major change before even CO2 emissions became a factor. So there's a lot of debate out there, and right now I think the issue on this agreement is it was just a bad structured deal, regardless of how you view climate change. It was a bad structured deal for the United States, and it imposed enormous requirements on us, and frankly left the rest of the world alone. And it would be a massive loss of jobs. And frankly, the United States was having to contribute close to $3 billion to a fund, a UN fund that would be given out to the rest of the world. This was all President Obama being president of the world. We need, and I'm grateful that we have the President of the United States and Donald Trump, who's looking out after our interest. We don't need to be bound to an agreement where China and India and other countries are frankly left unchecked.
Well, bring us up to date on the current situation with the Health Care Act.
We passed the Health Care Act in the House. It is now in the Senate. In this act, we lifted the individual federal mandates, that is the federal government telling you and requiring you what insurance you have to buy. We have put those choices back in the hands of the American people, that's what should be allowed to do. It shouldn't be the American government forcing you to buy something that you don't want to buy. And we have put Medicaid back in the control of the states. There, frankly, was no accountability of Medicaid. Vast amount of waste and fraud. Now, we're a safety net. We're a generous country to people who really have need. But there has been tremendous exploitation of it, and this will enable and require the states to be more proactive in seeing who's eligible for Medicaid, and not just allowing the federal government to fund it all, and the states then give out the money. So that's important. It eliminated $1 trillion of new taxes imposed by Obamacare. It really just reestablished the relationship between the patient and the doctor. Got the federal government out of the way.
If I'm not mistaken, North Carolina citizens can only purchase health insurance from one, maybe two companies. Will this change federally open up to where I, as an insurance customer, could shop nationwide to get whatever insurance coverage I feel is best?
Exactly. In this bill, it's the working we have to go through the parliamentary rules in the Senate. It's called reconciliation. That part of the bill, which will enable across state lines, will occur in a subsequent legislation. What we could only do in this particular legislation were issues related to the financial aspects of the bill. That's just because of the rules of the Senate that only required 50 votes. So, but that will be clearly the next phase of this bill, and it's very important. Just like you buy you buy your car insurance across state lines, we haven't been able to do that. And the tragedy of it is there's been no competition in the market and no restraint on cost. Right now, as you said, Blue Cross is in 95 of the 100 counties. That's the sole provider of health care. Now, Blue Cross recently just pulled out of Missouri and Kansas, and considering other states. United has pulled out the rest of the country, so has Humana and Aetna. We have a major collapse of the entire Obamacare because these is not financially sustainable. It never was set up on an actuarially sound basis. So that's why we must go in and reform this failing healthcare program. And that's what we're about doing.
A lot of numbers have come out about people who will not get health care coverage or will not be eligible, and then the big question about pre-existing conditions. And in this day and age, I know that is a huge thing for everyone. Is that going to be, can people relax and know that it's going to be available to them with pre-existing conditions at an affordable price?
Let's clear the air on that. Pre-existing conditions are covered in our health care bill. In fact, there's a fund set up of $138 billion to cover issues like pre-existing conditions and mental health issues. Every state is required to provide health care for people with pre-existing conditions. And if they choose a waiver, then that fund, and they have to go through certain guidelines to achieve a waiver, but then that fund is accessible, and it will be affordable. We will be able to have that capacity there. Let me just say to you, in Obamacare right now, there was not the financial capacity to support any amount of pre-existing conditions. As I said, it was financially collapsing. We've set up a system that makes sense. It's based on a model that was done in Maine, and it's been very successful. So we took that prototype and we put that into our national plan. But again, this will be achieved through the states having a fund that they can access to provide health care, supplementally support the health care for people with pre-existing conditions, so that we keep the rest of the premiums low for everyone else.
Well, let's hope it all works out. Now, bring us up to date now on the whole process of what else is going on in Congress besides what we hear on the national news here lately.
Well, we're very focused. Frankly, the media doesn't like to publicize it, but we've passed twice as many bills the first 100 days as the Obama administration. And these were very meaningful bills that lifted the regulatory burden on small business. So, been a lot of media attention on Russia and other matters that I think will end up, at the end of the day, there'll be nothing there. But reality is we have done our job, and we've done a huge job to get this economy moving again. And we saw that, frankly, the same model back in the 1980s. I lived in Washington when Ronald Reagan was president. And we lowered the regulatory burden, we lowered the tax burden, and the economy took off. We were, after 2 years, in 1982, we were creating 300,000 jobs a month, then 400,000 jobs a month, and 500,000 jobs a month. Well, we're focused now on regulatory relief and reducing the tax burden. By the end of this year, we want to have a tax bill that's simpler and fair for everyone and lowers the tax rates for corporations, for individuals, for small businesses. And that will be the jump start to get this country back on track. You know, it was sadly, in the last 8 years, the average job growth has been only 175,000 jobs a month. And the people who have least, that demographic group economically who have gone up the least, have been low-income minority people. Wealthy people have gotten wealthier. We've lost the middle class because we've had such a restrictive economy. It's been bound up by too many regulations and too heavy of a tax burden. You know, America didn't become a great country because of a great government and great regulations. It became a great country because of freedom and liberty and opportunity and bound by the Constitution. And now we've had a government that's just been out of control, totally emerging itself in very dominant ways in the affairs of our country and really restricting our growth. You have to grow. And you can't be at 2% economic growth. At one point, Ronald Reagan was at 7.3% economic growth. We've got to grow. When we grow the economy, that creates jobs. And you know what else it does? Those jobs generate more tax revenue back to the federal coffers. That's going to reduce our deficits and our debt. We have a $20 trillion debt. You can't tax your way out of that debt. We have to grow the economy. We have to create jobs that generate more revenue. And we're going to be able to do that.
Well, one major item I want to discuss before we have to end our conversation, infrastructure, our highways, and number two, with all the problems with this internet and hacking and so forth going on, guarding our electricity and our main thoroughfares as far as getting power to everybody and keeping it. What's Congress looking at right now to help with our security in that respect?
Well, infrastructure, there's two parts here. Infrastructure, we need to deal with our roads, our bridges, our ports, all the things that are important for transportation. Thank God for Dwight D. Eisenhower who built our highway system. We wouldn't be where we are today without it. So there's $3 trillion of corporate profits overseas that they don't want to bring back to the states because they get taxed again. And we have the highest corporate tax rate of any country in the industrialized world. And if we'll reduce that, say maybe down to 15%, that would, at $3 trillion, that would create $450 billion of tax revenue we could apply toward infrastructure alone. So that's number one. Number two, you talked about security in the grid. Yes, we have issues protecting our electrical grid. We frankly have more support from the private sector, from the Duke Energies and Southern companies, and they are very much on top of it. I mean, I've been into their systems. I've met with their leadership. I've hosted briefings on our ability to protect our grid in Washington. I had experts come over from Israel, so I'm very much involved in that issue. And there's more we can do, but we're further along on that and have a decent handle on it. The grid is something you it's a fluid situation, but we have to be very capable in terms, particularly with cyber. And it's a cyber issue, and defense systems and cyber to protect you from attacks on the grid. I'm having, Sandy, my 8th conference for members of Parliament dealing with cybersecurity and terrorism, counterterrorism financing, and intelligence sharing. It'll be in Europe later on this month, and we have about 100 members of Parliament from 35 countries who will be there. And the purpose is to hear from experts so that every country has the best technology capable for cyber war, for counterterrorism financing, and for intelligence sharing. All these are critical components in making sure that we can have strong national security.
Well, it's good to hear other things going on besides Russia and some of the other major issues we hear on the national so-called media. But we do appreciate you taking time to be with us and filling us in on the latest as far as what's going on in Congress affecting our local area. And again, Congressman Robert Pittenger, thank you so much.
My hat's off to you all. You do a great job, Sandy, keeping your public informed. And also hats off to Sheriff Kersey. He does a great job. And I really had a great time with him yesterday meeting, dealing with opioids and other major programs that he's doing to help the community. So y'all are doing a good job. It's just my honor to be there to represent you.
Oh, we thank you once again. Congressman Robert Pittenger. 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 Congressman Robert Pittenger.